Hello, everybody. Welcome to another IG Live. I have a very special guest today. His name is Mike, and I'm excited to have a conversation with him. I admire him, and I love what he does with his page. And I just can't wait to kind of dive in and even get to know him even better. And so with that, we are going to wait for him to pop on here. He shouldn't be long. Of course, he is a busy man, so you never know. But I cannot wait. Look, there he is. I'm viewing his request. We're going to get rolling. This is exciting. Well, hello to you, too. How are you today? I hope well. Hey, Mike.
Hello, Brad. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Well, that's good to hear. You always hop at the beginning of these things and kind of stall time, waste time. I still, after all these IG Lives I do, I can never figure out the best way to do an introduction.
I don't know. But
But hey, man, thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. I do appreciate it. I know you're a busy person, and it's just honored that you're able to have a conversation with me. So thank you.
for sure, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. So as people are joining, I was wondering if you would mind, for people that maybe follow me that don't know a lot about you, would you just take kind of a moment and kind of introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi, everyone watching. I'm seeing some familiar names down there. My name is Mike Mayashiro. Who am I anymore? I used to defined by a lot of things and roles I used to play and hold that I don't know, don't really anymore. I came out as gay a couple years ago and then publicly like 4 months ago. But I've been in professional Christian ministry, specifically in the charismatic stream, for like over 10 years. I was traveling and speaking on spiritual intelligence, specifically the gift of discernment. And then I just had a lot of deep and like impactful experiences with God that were continuously advocating for my queerness as a gay man. And I just didn't want to hear that from God, because the world I was living in and the leaders that I followed and the mentors that I ascribed to be like, none of them were affirming. So for me to say yes to God in that way was to turn my back on all of these people and everything that, my platform was built on. And that was a whole journey and process, but I finally was able to cross that line. I'm so thankful that I did. And now a lot of my energy and work is toward advocating for the queer community, specifically within the context of the Christian faith. And that's probably like that. That's like an intro, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's really awesome. Okay. So, well, you said a lot in there. Okay. And, I'm going to ask you a few questions about that. Give us a little bit. You said that you obviously have you been in the church your whole entire life, or how did you end up in the church?
Yeah. So I got saved I got taken to Sunday school for the first time when I was 4. And I was told about hell and heaven and Jesus and forgiveness and all of that in Sunday school the first time I was at church. And I took it. I was like, okay, please save me from hell. I don't want that. I'll take Jesus. And then I was deeply entrenched in Christianity, specifically the Baptist denomination, for most of my early Christian days.
Yeah. Well, I grew up largely in the Southern Baptist. I know, right? Everybody cringes when I say
my condolences, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly what it was. It's funny because I grew up that way. I went to Christian college. I went to seminary, got my master's from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and then promptly left the Baptist realm. Seminary did it to me, to where then I was non-denominational as a pastor, right? So I took up that. But okay, so enough about me. So you said you came out 4 months ago. Did I hear that correctly?
Publicly, yeah. So I came out to me in my immediate environment like a little over 2 years ago, but then out here 4 months ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was the response?
Mostly overwhelmingly positive and celebratory. I've gotten a lot of hate too, but I don't know. I mean, I've gotten way more love and celebration than I have hate, but the hate is just a lot more poignant, right? And specific and aggressive. So it's been a mixed bag. And then also, I've gotten a lot of silence from people who were important to me, who were close to me, which is painful, right? Like Martin Luther King Jr. is famous for saying, it's not the hate from my enemies, but the silence from my friends that's been the most painful. And I can attest to that. It's been so sad to see like how indifferent or passive or like hands off people who said, you know, really strong things about our relationship have been. Like, apparently this is a deal breaker for a lot of Christians. And I'm like, that's really surprising and sad to see. But yeah.
Yeah, they have a tendency to be very passionate. And it is the silence, okay? So it's like when I stopped being a pastor and really struggled with my Christian faith, you know, my mom hasn't talked to me in like 3 or 4 years. They're very tight-knit with it's supposed to be a certain way, right? So totally. So you said you came out to your friends 2 years ago, like personal people. Did you go before that as well, or? Yeah. How did you hold that in? Like, how did you live that life? That's got to be eating you up, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I torturously and carefully lived a closeted life. I knew since I was conscious that I was gay, what we call gay, since I was 10 years old.
Okay.
I've been gay my whole life, but I realized what I was at 10, and then for that whole time after, just, you know, I shoved it deep down. I knew from a pretty early age that, I mean, just even within my home, like anything that came on TV that was homosexual in nature was met with disgust and vocal opposition and turn it off, ew, gross, disgusting, oh brother. Like that was practice in my home. And so I was learning from a really young age that the way that I naturally wired is gross, is deplorable, is unacceptable, doesn't belong here, whatever. So you learn at a pretty young survival age to just start shoving that stuff away, which I did. And then when I met God for the first time at 18, the experience was so different than this God I was learning about in church. And then the second time I encountered God, they explicitly told me they wanted me this way, like gay and all. And I could not accept that. I mean, I accepted it from God. I just did not expect that I could embody that, be honest about that, express that in my Christian environment. So I kept silent about that for 14 years. And I had multiple experiences with God who continuously advocated for me fully the way I was, no changing. I was confronted a few times by God for trying to alter my sexuality. But I just kept shoving it down, and I kept being distracted by like inner healing and counseling and the men's purity group a few times, right? And just all these different options that were offered to me to live a celibate life. And I was basically a sexless being for a chunk of that. And so eventually it became like, it wasn't a sexual thing at first for me coming out. It was a conviction, like a spiritual alignment thing. And then from there, once I made the choice to stop doing this to myself, the trauma got to be recognized and all the pain started coming out. And I started getting to like fully feel my experience and give my heart on like the permission to be honest. And I got to start admitting that I didn't feel safe, that I was hurt, that I was abused, that I was oppressed, that I was silenced. All this language was so accurate to the experience, and I couldn't feel any of that for so long because the closet has a numbing effect after a while, I would say, you know?
Yeah, it's, geez. I told you a little bit about my mom and daughter, right?
Yeah.
The followers here is my daughter came out when she was 11, and she decided to come out in Sunday school of all places, or small group on a Sunday morning. And I was the family life pastor at that point, right? So, and I had no idea. Right? No idea, right? So I'm in charge of children's ministry, youth ministry, young adults, collegians, you know, and oversee the people that oversee those, right? And so suddenly I have people walking up to me at church going, hey, you know, Grace said this, and I'm just like, oh, okay, right? I didn't have a problem with it, right? And I was like, okay, but it's the way in which they came across is like, hey, we're praying for her, we're going to fix her, you know, kind of mentality. And it became very clear at that moment with the pastoral staff and myself. That is like, are you going to choose the church, or are you going to sit there and say it's okay to be this way, right? And I go, well, that's a no-brainer for me. I go, my daughter. I choose who she is and who she loves, and I believe she's loved and should be loved for who she is, right? And so I walked away. So that was about 4 years ago, right? So, and that's when you talked about silence. I haven't heard peeps from my friends. I was in ministry my whole life, and now it's just silent, right? So it's like,
Brad, I want to say to that, just by the way, because I've talked to so many people at this point, especially like influencers who are experiencing the same thing we're both describing of they made a choice, they stood for something, they didn't agree to something, and then all of a sudden they were excommunicated, silenced, there was no follow through, there was no checkup, there was no relational connection from the group they were a part of. And I think I just want to say this to everyone who hasn't taken a stand on stuff like this, not just the queer conversation, maybe including that. I mean, definitely including that, but anything that doesn't align with core Christian doctrine. Look at how Christians behave. We're not unique. No one is safe within that system. You're all subject to being discarded and becoming irrelevant. This is not based on love or relationship or loyalty. It's just based on agreement. And if you don't agree, you're out. And I don't know what we're defining as tyrannical. If this isn't it, I'm like, I don't know what the actual definition of that is. But those of you who think this doesn't apply to you, the moment your life demands that you disagree with something going on there, the same thing's going to happen, right? And I'm like, I don't know why this is still so prominent and still like happening. It's crazy because it's so obvious now. But anyway,
You're right. You're right. And the majority of my clientele, they've been ostracized or kicked out or, just shunned for asking certain questions, not believing certain doctrines, whatever it may be. And it dumbfounds me because the very thing that I think if you look, obviously, Jesus in Scripture, he would never have done that. Never. I don't get it, right? And it's like, and so I wanted her to grow up and be safe. And have the freedom to be her, discover, whatever have you. And I don't regret that an instant, for a second. But I've seen it far too often happen to people. So let me ask you this. You are a pastor. What is it that makes your church different? I know, right? This is a softball question, right?
Yeah.
What is it that makes your church different from? I guess I asked this question because I know a lot of people that are still spiritual, but have never been able to find a church that they feel welcomed in. That's not a bait and switch.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's a great question. I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't know what I'm about to say to you right now. I don't know what's going to happen. So whatever is about to happen, Brad, I totally blame you. This is your fault.
Yeah.
So for the record, I loosely hold the term or title pastor, and I hold that unofficially. And the reason I'm willing to allow that title to come up in association with who I am is because what I acknowledge as a pastor in the Bible, not the current institutionalized church system that everyone has survived or is still beholden to. I'm like, I don't care about that. I don't respect it. That's not what I'm talking about. But what we've understood with the term pastor in our culture, I'm like, I think that's probably a pretty accurate hat for me to wear based on my function or priority in this conversation. So like when you ask about my church, again, I'm going to have to pull the language apart. Like I don't have a church. I don't own or run a church. I'm not trying to lead one. I do have people, followers of Jesus, who gather. I oversee and preside over that space and do the best I can to support an environment for people to get to recover from, colonized Christian nationalism that has been super harmful and enforced a lot of really bad ideas and used the Bible to shove it down our throats. And I'm like, hey, you guys, we need to take responsibility for this. We need to detox from this. We need to clean up what has happened to us with this book. How about instead of just throwing the book away entirely or walking away from all this, let's do the work. Let's get messy. Let's roll our sleeves up and get in here, and let's break this stuff that doesn't belong here anymore. Let's clean the things up that shouldn't be here. Let's heal from the pain and the hurt that's been inflicted on us, and let's take ownership over how we move forward. So it's a big, messy, mixed bag of people. And the goal is not to get them to profess Christianity at the end of this. The goal is for people to be authentic in whatever faith they've genuinely identified with and understood, and who they call God to be. And so I think even just the terminology I'm using automatically disqualifies me from being, yeah. Oh, like as a compliment, like it's a badge of honor to me to no longer fit into such an oppressive, exclusive, toxic system. I'm like, I am so thankful that I don't fit there anymore. Anyway, so for what it's worth, like that's where this stuff is finding context. I don't even remember what the original question was, but that's my answer.
Well, I mean, you brought up some interesting points. You talk about doing the work, about getting in, doing the work. Obviously, the traditional church believes that the Word of God, as they call it, is inspired, inerrant, and
you mean the
Bible? What's that?
The Bible.
The Bible,
right? Yeah.
Yes, right. Is all of these things? Obviously, they don't hold to all that because there are things that they don't follow, right? With it, I know you've heard of the clobber passages and all of those other great things, right? So how do you get in and do the work and decide, hey, this is relevant for today and this is not?
Yeah, great question. I mean, my goodness, I'm going to try and give you a short answer to that.
Good luck with that.
Right. I feel fast. Thank you for that. So it's interesting. My journey, how about instead of just here's how this worked.
Okay.
I faced the clobber passages. I sought a bunch of voices of people who were doing a lot more work than I'd ever seen done, who asked questions I had never heard asked in my Christian tradition. And I was like, even intellectually, this is such a dishonest conversation we're having on the non-affirming side. A bunch of these questions and points that are brought up in this work, we don't even entertain. We've never asked this stuff before. This is so imbalanced and corrupt. So I did the work of just detangling, unclobbering the 6 clobber passages, right? Which Sodom and Gomorrah, Leviticus 18 and 22, Romans 1, 1 Corinthians, and then 1 Timothy, right? Those are the 6. And so just basically pulling apart each of those references that the church has traditionally used to weaponize the Bible against queer people. In each instance, I dug deep and looked at a bunch of different work that's been done around etymology, translation, cultural context. There's a lot of components that come into how we interpret any historical document. And in each instance, it became the more work you did, the further and further away any queer person you're looking at in the text. It just became so awkwardly obvious that this has nothing to do with gay people. So that just kind of got put away early on in the process. And then the more I pulled apart the harmful rhetoric coming from the evangelical church, I'm going to say the white evangelical church specifically, because that's such a component to this. Thank you. The awkward thing about this is these tenets of belief, these doctrines, these creeds, these things that we call faith that we all agree to are interconnected. So the moment one of them gets disproven or dispelled or falls apart in your genuine regard for this, it doesn't stand alone. That's not an isolated occurrence. It actually starts to trickle out and affect other pieces. So at that point, now we have to start doing other work, asking other questions, and having to take responsibility for the cascading effect that inadvertently ends up happening as a byproduct of what this whole system is based off of. And so it went from declobbering the clobber passages to holy expletive. There's a huge mess going on. There's a whole agenda going on here I hope the malice that I think I'm seeing here wasn't intentional, but this is specifically targeted and harmful to very particular groups of people. And that group has changed over time, but there continues to be this bullying dynamic where there's the majority, the privileged few that get to, you know, like target and weaponize this ancient text against a certain group of people. And we just have changed who those people are over history. And it's like, okay, forget who it's targeted at this point. We need to address the fact that this is even happening. This has to go away. And so at this point in the timeline, we're going to represent and advocate for the marginalized identities who are being harmed by this really bad practice. So it started with, let's just look at these 6 passages. And I got very intense and like aggressive with that work. And then it just kind of had ripple effects and it cascaded and it went in all directions. So the word deconstruction then came in, right? That had to happen. Yeah.
You know, agreed with you. People don't want to hear the truth though, because now they have to question everything.
Right.
And as soon as my daughter, I was already struggling with it before, but as soon as my daughter came out, it was like, okay, let me get into this even more, because I was questioning. And so I started peeling out, and I did the same thing you did. And by the time I got further and further away from it was actually ever talking about homosexuality or anything, right? So, and then that led to a whole domino effect of what the church has done to weaponize and control people, right? Really down to. And then everything fell apart. It's just like, okay, so I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I mean, because you know, I don't want to do that. But I actually found that I actually love Jesus more now than I did when I was in the church.
Yeah.
It's weird how that worked out.
Totally. Agreed. Same.
Yeah. So, okay. So, obviously, was your family aware? I mean, I know it's a personal question, so.
I told my family when I was 25, so 10 years ago, I was like, you guys, I struggle with being attracted to men. I'm not attracted to women. Right, that was something they knew of, but the language was I was same-sex attracted, or I struggled with my sexuality. I would never have said I was gay back then, because that's a whole profession of an identity, right? Because the evangelical church just has such a vernacular and like mincing technicality around the whole conversation that I think is actually really dishonest. But that's what I was steeped in. So at that point, I couldn't have said those things. So fast forward, about 2 years ago, the conversation changed. I was like, hey, you guys, here's actually what's going on. God has been expressing to me for a while now that they don't want this to be different. God actually wants me like this. I know that's hard to hear. It's been hard for me. I'm at a point that I now at this point need to respond and take ownership for what I am accountable to in my relationship with God. I can't keep pretending like they're not saying these things to me. What everyone else has to say is no longer acceptable. It doesn't defend me against the intimacy I share with God. I have to respond to this. So, you know, and that changed the conversation, and my parents were not happy. They're still not. Like, this has been a difficult, straining dynamic to our relationship, and we are currently still walking out. What does our relationship even look like at this point? How do you respond to your son who's dedicated his life's work to something you fundamentally disagree with? Or so we're working that out. I'm growing in my patience and grace toward them to a degree. But I'm like, you guys are accountable to what you're witnessing in my life. I'm your son. You have a front row seat to this, and you don't get to just deny my experience or my testimony. Like, I'm not just looking for an excuse to have a sexual relationship with someone of the same gender as me, right? Or same sex. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm talking about who I know God to be and what they are saying to me. And for you to tell me this isn't true is to deny everything about what I've understood about this person. That's what we're having to talk about at this point, which isn't true for every gay person, but that's true for me in this context. And so that's a lot. That's a tall order for either one of us on either end of this to represent and respond to and navigate. And so I want to give them space and permission to like go on the journey. The thing that's been intolerable for me is them not doing the work, them not actually responding to the conversation. Like, this isn't a request or a negotiable like tenet of our relationship. You are either going to engage here or we're not going to have a relationship is probably what's going to end up happening. Right. So they're currently wrestling through, what are they going to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen a lot of conservative parents struggle with that, right? So while being I was asked, a family came up to me, a husband and a wife, and it's like, hey, my son is gay. He's getting married. Should I go or shouldn't I go? I'm like, what do you mean, should you or shouldn't you go? Of course you should go. I mean, that's your son. Do you want to lose that relationship forever as well? I mean, but I love the way you put that, is that God was reaffirming you and the way he created you. You know, a lot of people, conservative people, traditional Southern Baptists, whatever you want to call them, right, still think it's a choice. Right? And so to the thought of God reaffirming that he created you this way, they want to pick up stones, because that's just, yeah, no, I mean, that's just amazing. It's scary. So I hope your parents do put in the work. I do.
Me too.
I do. I do. I feel for you in that. So, so what would you tell someone who is struggling with coming out the closet, or they have, and they're struggling with believing that God loves them?
Yeah.
You know,
man,
who they are.
Yeah. I would say I would say so many things, and I have said so many things. So I'm going to whittle a lot of what I would like to say down to a few simple things here, and I'm going to try not to sound cliche. One thing I would say is, regardless of any human being in your experience who has told you whatever they've said, anyone who has communicated that God does not love you because of who you love does not know God. If you say you love God, whom you've not seen, but yet you hate your brother whom you have seen, you're a liar, and the truth is not in you. God is love. And Christians are the ones who get very technical and rigid and specific and exclusive about how anything is allowed to operate, maybe especially love. And it's so awkward because they tout an unconditional loving God with all of these conditions around how you're supposed to relate to this person and what that God is or isn't going to do based on how you choose, based on how you believe. And they're so entrenched in their own rhetoric, they can't even see how toxic it is or recognize the harm it's producing in their own lives. Like how estranged they've become from their own neighbor. Like they literally don't have the capacity to love their neighbor actually, like unconditionally agape love their neighbor, because they can't see their neighbor. All they see is a walking unbeliever, someone who's violating all the rules that they've subjected themselves to, and then thus is not worthy, or God won't move in their life, or it's so sad. So I'm saying to any queer person, Christians don't get this. I'm not saying that to knock on them. I don't want to attack Christians. That's not really something I care about. Unfortunately, Christians are so loud and so aggressive with their attempts to disrupt the love of God and the grace of God in anybody's life, maybe especially a queer person's life, that it is such a misrepresentation of who God actually is and how God actually operates and feels toward you. So I'm here to tell you, hope in spite of anyone else's opinion, and I get to be another opinion here, but let me just say, I feel intensely close to God. Like we share a beautiful intimacy that is legitimate and has been around for years of my life. And this person loves queer people. This person loves the LGBTQ plus community, is not expecting them to change, doesn't want them to change, is not doing work to get them to be different. God loves these people. And I would actually propose that the queer community is a beautiful expression of the diversity and complexity and creativity of God, not a contradiction, not a perversion. We are demonstrating something beautiful and holy and sanctified and profound that the rest of the body has been invited to learn, to humble themselves and receive from. We are currently considered least of these in our society right now. Jesus would prioritize us. We are that person who needs a cup of water. We are that person who is in prison that you need to visit. We are that person who is hungry, right? Who is sick, right? The one that Jesus is like, hey, when you did this to the least of these, you did it to me. Hi, Jesus is right here. And most evangelicals cannot see Jesus because he's blocked by a rainbow of fence. And I'm like, that's their loss. So I'm saying to you, queer person, whoever you are, whatever place you are, as regardless of how Christians have behaved, Jesus has chosen you and has chosen your side. It's not an equal conversation. There aren't good points on both sides of this. Jesus chose the side of the oppressed, the side of the marginalized. He wasn't indifferent. He didn't like evaluate and weigh out everyone's points and their freedoms. And that is not how this went. Jesus chose the person who was being crushed and joined them. So guess what? That's you. You've been chosen. You are embraced. I would also say you have no idea the level of silencing and trauma you've actually allowed yourself to experience and endure because your survival component kicked in. So your being learned how to minimize the level of pain you were in, or even being able to recognize or admit needs that you have. Like, so much of that got numbed out so you could simply exist and survive in the world you're in. I want to say to you, a big part of why I want to advocate for you coming out of that closet and doing the work, and yes, suffering the loss and the sacrifice of that, what that will bring to your life. But I think all of it is worth it, because you will then get to actually be in touch with yourself, and you will give yourself permission to be fully human. You'll get to fully embody who you are and feel the whole thing, experience the whole breadth of your personhood. And from there, you get to heal. You get to be realigned. You get to have wholeness. You get to represent yourself, because there's nothing wrong with you, but you are growing up in a society that refuses to acknowledge or celebrate or embrace who you are, and has put a lot of stumbling blocks in your way that have adverse effects on any human being designed for love that has to walk through all of that. So come out of the closet, do the work, so that you have the opportunity to feel and experience yourself fully. And I could not have heard this pre-closet, but on the other side of all that work I did, it was shocking how many times this little boy inside of me got to finally, for the first time, come up for air and say what he couldn't say for so long, and feel what he couldn't feel before, and get to admit things he wasn't allowed to admit because that closet was so intense. I didn't know that stuff until I came out. And it wasn't until like way after that I was able to do the breathing human stuff that allowed for me to actually feel those things. And so I understand it's not safe for a lot of you. It's scary. I get that. So do what you need to do to be in a position where you're actually set up for success and you can be safe. But the conditions will probably likely never be like perfect for you in this lifetime. That doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. You are worth it. So like, don't let your life pass you by without getting to actually fully embody who you are, who you've always been this whole time, and who God sees and wants represented here. You are worth it.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it's true, because you know, you're talking, and I thought about the way I was raised, and you're right. As an evangelical, you look at other people like, oh yeah, they're heathens. I mean, you look at everybody's a project, right? I mean, like, everybody, they need to change.
You actually do. Like, whatever ministry or love you extend to these people is unto them changing. You're willing to do it as long as them changing is actually in your sight. The moment that's not actually going to be an outcome here, you're not giving it to them anymore. It's so conditional, and it's a reflection of what kind of love we think we're getting from God. It's sick, really.
Yeah, I mean, I look at like the church signs that say all are welcome, you know, and stuff like that. And in churches I've been in, it's like, we love everybody, but as soon as you come in, we expect you to change, right? That's the mentality. We expect you to change and be somebody different, or you're not going to be able to volunteer here, or you can't lead here, or you're looked at differently, or, you know, I mean, or you're sinning. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the harm that systematic structure has done to kids, to young adults,
yeah,
to adults all over the world is heartbreaking.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It's a crime. It's so unjust. And it shouldn't be coming from the group of people who claim to have special knowledge about who God is and what God is up to in the world. These people should be the last group in society who are doing these things. Yet they're the ones leading the charge in this stuff. It's so crazy.
Yeah. It's like a big clique, and you're either part of it or you're not. I mean, that's it. Oh, yeah. The big country club.
Yeah.
Man, well, thank you for that. So if somebody wants to, like, somebody's watching this or will watch this that wants to know more about feeling worthy, becoming more themselves, what resources or where would you point them?
Yeah, a few places. These are the few things that I would point that I do currently when people are DMing me on Instagram or something and they're asking for stuff. I'll copy and paste some go-to resources that I have in a note on my phone. One is this LGBTQ plus playlist that I have on my YouTube channel. I've done a lot of interviews with a lot of different voices and people who've done a lot of work here. And I've curated a playlist of just that conversation with a bunch of different people. So that to me is like something I'm very proud of. I put a lot of work and energy into that. It was a few years in the making of even being able to put that together. So that's available. It's free on YouTube, right? So I point people to that. I have a series called The Rainbow Road that I did. After all the work that I did, I just basically shot multiple sessions that I have streaming on Numa Plus. So that's a subscription thing that people can subscribe to just go through that content and basically pull apart the clobber passages and like, what do you do with the Bible as a queer person? How do you know this book isn't actually condemning you to hell, right? That's what that whole course is dedicated to. I have a Facebook page people can join called The Rainbow Bridge, and it's free for anybody to be part of who's queer. It's only for exclusively queer people. So like Brad, you wouldn't be allowed to be in that room, but other people can come, and like there's a lot of dialogue that happens every week.
My daughter could be in that room.
Your daughter could be in it. Yeah, she would qualify. And then I've got a more exclusive, specific group called the Rainbow Room. This is a paid mentorship group. These are people who want to aggressively and intentionally and persistently engage in like detoxifying their own theology for their own queer life. They're coming out of the closet. They're out of the closet. They're preparing to come out of the closet. There's a lot of that dialogue and support. So that's a bit more of an aggressive approach, but people who want to get serious and fast track this process, that's a space they can jump into. So I offer that to them as well. And then there are a lot of just great people on social media to follow that I'm like, there's so much great content coming out today at this point that there's so many followers, influencers I would point them to just like continue to get that content in their life. And then I also have a resource page on my website with just a bunch of books, podcast episodes, articles, that kind of thing that I've just curated over the last few years that people can go through. And the books I listed, I put little brief descriptions as to why you'd read that book. And I put an order that I would suggest where to start. And, so that's as well available as well. And then people get to go at their own pace of how much they actually want to do the work. Right. But so those are the resources that I point people to. Like, there's just so much to sink your teeth into.
I love it. And don't be surprised if I hit you up in the DMs because I'd want to post a story about that on my page.
Right. Yeah, sure. I'll send you whatever you need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the best way to find you is obviously your IG page.
Yeah, Instagram or YouTube. I'm on Facebook. I'm on TikTok. So those are probably the four of the best places. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. We're going to wrap this up, but I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing everything you shared and how heartfelt it was and how true is. It has, as a person that is not queer, I feel like it's our responsibility, or my responsibility, to not just say, yeah, I support, but to be actively supporting.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate that.
I was talking to Eric about that the other day. It's like, I'm going to go to a pride parade. I'm gonna give free hugs. I'm gonna, whatever I need to do, I want to do that.
Cool.
So I thank you for taking time to educate someone like me.
Yeah.
Brett,
well. I want to interrupt you and just say thank you for doing this. Thanks for listening. Thanks for prioritizing this conversation. Thanks for choosing your daughter. I know a lot of parents who that wasn't as obvious or as quick or easy or simple for them. So thank you for being brave and being willing to throw down for her. Like, that's such a beautiful display of unconditional love and solidarity for someone who isn't fitting the mold. And so, yeah, thank you for pressing in and not just like checking that off your list, but continuing to engage and lean into this conversation. I so appreciate that.
Well, it hopefully is showing love, right? I mean, it's love.
For sure.
Right? That's what it's about. So, thank you so much, Mike.
Sure.
And everybody that's watching this, thank you for tuning in. If you are not following Mike, please follow him, learn, educate yourself, become, an advocate, help spread the message of love, really.
Yeah.
So Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too, Brad.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.